Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Kevin Bork, and I'm thrilled to see so many people joining us as we delve into some exciting and timely new tools in RETScreen. This is the Net Zero Planning webinar featuring RETScreen Expert version 9.1, which is the latest version released in November. First on our agenda today, I'm going to give a quick background on RETScreen. For those of you who may be new to RETScreen, RETScreen is a powerful tool with a lot of different modules and features. And once I've covered the basics, we'll transition to our new portfolio decarbonization framework. This framework takes a top-down approach to quickly identify decarbonization pathways, and it's built to work seamlessly with RETScreen. We've put a lot of thought and effort into this, and the hope is that you'll find it a valuable tool in your decarbonization journey. Following that, we'll delve into how this framework is centered on the facility level deep retrofit archetypes. These archetypes are available right within RETScreen, and they give you a comprehensive bottom-up view of any project or facility. The main focus of our webinar today is going to be the introduction of our new tool that we've developed, the portfolio-wide net zero planning tool. And I'm going to spend most of our time demonstrating this tool. And then I'll conclude our session with a Q&A period at the end. My plan is to present for about an hour, and then we'll dedicate the time at the end to answer any questions you have. Please use the Q&A panel only to ask your questions. I'm going to go ahead and answer one question I know many of you have already, and that is, yes, this is being recorded, and the video will be made available on our e-learning YouTube channel in a couple of days.
Kevin, sorry, it's Lawrence here. We don't see your slides. If you move ahead, we still see the first slide.
What slide do you see now?
We still see just the net zero planning with RETScreen Expert slide. The first one. Okay, well, apparently people can see the other slide, so you can go forward.
People can see?
Sorry. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so before I dive in, let me share a bit more about RETScreen. For those of you who don't know, RETScreen is a clean energy management software platform that enables low carbon planning, implementation, monitoring, and reporting. It's available in 38 languages, covering 2/3 of the world's population, and you can easily download RETScreen from our website at www.retscreen.net. We're part of Natural Resources Canada at the Canada Energy Research Centre, located just outside Montreal. Our division is managed under 3 business units. The RETScreen Innovation Lab is where we develop the software and databases, often in collaboration with other funding partners. We also have our RETScreen data onboarding service to help the public sector organizations in integrating their data into the RETScreen platform. We do this by helping to automate and standardize all of their energy and sustainability data so that their portfolios are up to date and accurate. So this is particularly useful for activities such as greenhouse gas reporting, energy management, and it can be part of larger sustainability initiatives such as ISO 50001. Lastly, we run a RETScreen capacity building program where we provide direct customer support and work constantly to build the capacity of our large and growing user base worldwide. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. When you first download and install the software, the first page you'll see is the home page, which gives you a comprehensive overview of many of the features of the software. At the facility level, there are 3 modules for analysis, and that's shown in the outer ring on the circle in the middle. There's a benchmark analysis module to do a quick analysis in the upper right-hand quadrant. There's a feasibility analysis module for energy, cost, and financial analysis, and a performance analysis module for tracking and more advanced analytics and regression and analysis on your energy data. This lets you, for example, monitor and verify the energy performance of your facilities over time. The software covers a wide range of facility types, and that's shown on the right-hand column, from all types of power plants and district energy, off-grid systems, including ones with storage, to different types of real property, including industrial, agricultural, commercial, and institutional buildings. It also includes individual measures like just lighting or looking at solar water heating, for example. In RETScreen, you can also perform transportation analysis or even generic user-defined analysis. When you're using this facility level workflow at an individual facility, the virtual energy analyzer is usually a good starting point and where I start all of my projects. So that's on the left-hand column at the top. And if you were planning a net zero plan for an individual facility using RETScreen, in the past, you'd typically start there. However, today I'm going to show you our new tool that allows you to take a top-down view from a portfolio perspective. This portfolio can start with one building or facility and can extend to thousands of facilities. This is demonstrated in our fourth module, which is what I'm going to show today, and is the portfolio analysis, showcased on the left-hand side by the little briefcase icons at the bottom. After this webinar, if you're interested in revisiting some of the features that I'm going to be showing, I've highlighted we have a net zero plan example built right into this homepage. I've highlighted that in yellow, and if you click on that, it will open an example for you based on some facilities in Edmonton, Alberta, and Canada. As I mentioned earlier, RETScreen has built an impressive global user community. We have over 800,000 users spread across every country and territory in the world, and we're growing at about 40,000 new users each year. The user community can be divided into three main groups. The first group consists of facility owners and operators. These individuals are at the forefront of sustainable energy and are responsible for reducing GHG emissions. This is usually where the GHG emissions are taking place. And so RETScreen has become an invaluable tool for these facility owners, particularly for large organizations that have multiple facilities. By using RETScreen, they're making informed decisions that have a positive impact on their operations. The second group of users are service providers and facilitators. And these organizations or individuals play a crucial role in supporting facility owners and operators in their objective of pursuing clean energy solutions. This group includes consultants from engineering and architectural firms, energy service companies, utility incentive programs, and even government organizations. RETScreen gives them the tools to help with their energy efficiency, renewable energy, and cogeneration projects, often on behalf of the facility owners and operators group. The third group of RETScreen users is in higher education. Professors at universities and college are using RETScreen both for teaching and research. Also, students often will use RETScreen in the classroom for their own research projects. And this is one of the inspiring aspects of my work, is to see the next generation of energy professionals learning and really engaging with our energy future. There are currently over 1,400 universities worldwide that use RETScreen for teaching and research. Now, here are some examples of how these user communities are using RETScreen in several large-scale projects. So these projects have allowed us to collaborate with different organizations. For example, in 2015, 2016, we supported NASA in using RETScreen feasibility analyses for their strategic sustainability plan, which was for over 800 buildings. In the middle image here, you can see another notable project involved working with the Council of Ontario Universities. And here we did energy benchmark and pre-feasibility studies for over 1,300 facilities across the province. More recently, on the right-hand side, we completed a 2050 carbon neutral plan for the Canadian Department of National Defence. And this involved doing a portfolio-wide feasibility study and developing a carbon neutral plan for over 8,000 military facilities. That includes military bases, armories, barracks, hangars, and so on. So what we do is anytime we're supporting customers like this, we make sure to incorporate what we've learned back into the software. We try to feel our users' pain, and then we learn from that. And our RhetScreen Innovation Lab works to automate, simplify, and develop those lessons back into the software. And so the best example of this is the development of the new Net Zero Planning tool, which is based on real projects and studies, especially the last one on this screen here. So the Net Zero Planning tool has been shaped by the day-to-day requirements that our real users face. A little word about our project funding. The development of this Net Zero Planning tool was made possible through various funding sources. Of course, our own Canada Energy Centre in Varennes. You can see the picture of our lab just outside Montreal. We also secured funding from Canada's Treasury Board Secretariat's Greening of Government Fund, and the Canadian Department of National Defence, their Directorate of Portfolio Innovation, and also Ontario's Independent Electricity System Operator, or IESO, and also the annual subscription revenue that are paid by RhetScreen's professional mode users is reinvested into the development and support of the tool. So now let's dive straight into the portfolio decarbonization framework. And as I mentioned before, this is a result of some in-depth studies, especially the one done by the Department of National Defence. So what we've crafted is a standardized portfolio decarbonization framework that's built directly into RhetScreen. You can see the visual representation by the circle on the left on the slide. And it starts off at the individual facility level and then scales up to cover an entire portfolio. The approach that we take draws inspiration from other carbon neutral studies, and we made sure that we were closely aligned with the different methodologies used in different industries and government initiatives. Now, if you look around the circle, you'll find step one is at the top. And step one is about establishing or setting the stage, establishing your reference greenhouse gas emissions and defining a target. So for an example, the Government of Canada has targets like 40% emissions reduction by 2025 and a 90% reduction by 2050. And if you're starting from scratch and you haven't been measuring or monitoring your data and you don't have a reference, don't worry. Step two is there to help with your baseline. So in step two, you're going to use energy models to help you by establishing your reference. In RhetScreen, we call this a base case energy model. Step two primarily revolves around creating a baseline for energy and GHG emissions, and that's done using the RhetScreen energy model in the feasibility analysis module. It's an important step, and that's done for each facility before rolling it up into the broader portfolio. You have to start at the facility level. Moving on to step three, we focus on identifying greenhouse gas emissions tied to the grid's transition to cleaner energy. This is an external factor. Think of private power developers, public utilities, and governments working to make the grid cleaner. Your facilities stand to benefit as the electricity emissions drop. RhetScreen helps to distinguish what's coming from the grid and what's a direct result of your actions at your facilities. So before you get into proposing new measures, step four urges you to take a closer look at your facilities and considers which ones could or should be disposed of. So if a building is in bad shape or it's not in use, you may want to consider to either sell it or even demolish it within the time frame of your carbon neutral plan. Also, with the rise of hybrid work arrangements, you might find opportunities to consolidate buildings, which results in a smaller portfolio of buildings and direct GHG emissions reductions. This step really lays the groundwork because your proposed case, where we're going to calculate the GHG emissions, the facilities that you dispose of are not going to be included as part of the equation in the proposed case. So the real action starts in step five. And in our framework, step five emphasizes starting with energy efficiency measures first, and And essentially the goal here is to slash your energy consumption and peak loads as much as possible in the most cost-effective way before moving on to other strategies. So this is one of the foundational steps before moving on to the next significant one, which is step 6, the electrification of heating. So you might have heard people say that we should electrify everything, and that step 6 is essentially where that happens. Today, when I go live into the software in a couple of minutes, you're going to witness how crucial and how critical this step really is, and equally understand the potential costs that are involved. And so you want to plan wisely, and RETScreen will help you do that in a couple of clicks. Next, for step 7, this is after implementing your energy efficiency measures and electrifying your heating. You'll delve into on-site renewable electricity generation. The aim here is to supply as much electricity as possible, if possible, and we emphasize doing that in a cost-effective manner. That's the essence of step 7. And so step 8, in some cases, it makes more sense not to do your on-site generation, but to procure off-site renewables. So for example, covering an entire building in photovoltaics to achieve net zero may not be practical or permitted. And instead, RETScreen offers you to, allows you to consider purchasing clean power from large wind farms or solar farms external to your site. Step 9 focuses on carbon offsets and removals, representing that stubborn remaining 10% usually. Typically, these are the challenging emissions to address. And that's one reason why they're essentially the last step. And finally, step 10 completes the circle and underscores that this is not a one-time effort. It's an ongoing commitment. You start to measure, monitor, and track your progress. It's not just a suggestion. It really is a necessity, because this iterative approach is your safeguard against complacency. It's not a one and done type of deal. You need to continually and consistently assess and adjust, not only validate the effectiveness of your plan, but also set the stage for continuous improvement so that as your building continues to get better and better, you're always looking for new opportunities. So there you have it. This is our quick walkthrough of our portfolio decarbonization framework. And think of it as a strategy on how to approach sort of decarbonization at a portfolio level. Now we're going to talk about facility level deep retrofit archetypes. So as I mentioned earlier, the heart of the framework are the individual facilities, that bottom-up approach I spoke about. And specifically in RETScreen, we're talking about the deep retrofit archetypes. So these archetypes give a practical starting point, and we're constantly adding and updating them. For example, the image on the left, you'll notice a recent addition, which is the archetype tailored for auto plant facilities. And on the right, you see the specific measures listed. They include energy efficiency and renewables that you need for achieving substantial GHG emissions reductions to reach that 80 to 90% mark. And today, I'm not going to dive into the nitty-gritty details of these archetypes. You can find some videos that we've recorded on our RETScreen e-learning channel and the RETScreen World Conference website. But everything starts with these facility level deep retrofit archetypes. And when you're looking at the bigger picture, the overall portfolio plan, these archetypes are flexible because they allow you to change what gets analyzed. After running your analysis, you can adjust them to scale, to fit the facility. You can calibrate them based on their actual energy consumption. You can modify them after an on-site energy audit, if that aligns with your plan. But the journey towards net zero in RETScreen starts with these deep retrofit archetypes. So now let's talk about the portfolio-wide net zero planning tool. So this new tool uses the energy modeling for the energy modeling of the facilities we just saw for the and summarizes the results into various charts and tables. And most importantly, it generates a waterfall graph, which you can see on the left. This graph is a crucial element in net zero planning, and we've designed it so that it aligns with the portfolio decarbonization framework we saw earlier. And we've seen that it's a relatively common approach when visualizing net zero plans like this. Now, in the graph, you'll see in the table at the bottom, you'll see labels like reference or cleaner and electricity grid or on-site renewables. And this follows the exact logic of the decarbonization framework that we just saw. The waterfall graph flows logically from setting emissions reduction targets, understanding your baseline, all the way through disposal strategies, energy efficiency measures, electrification of heating, and the use of renewables and offsets. The tool itself is an image on the right, and you can adjust other values, click on execute, and the tool will do the heavy lifting running the analysis. So let's transition into the software itself. So I'm going to turn off my camera momentarily just so that I can ensure that the software is running properly. And now I have the I have the software up in front of me. Lorenz, maybe could you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Thanks. Great. Okay, so when you download and install RetScreen on your computer, and you first open it up, this is the page that you're going to see. And you'll see here this circle. So I'm live in the software now. I'm not in a PowerPoint as I was before. And you can see here it's dynamic. So this center icon here, as I said, is for your facility. And you can see in the software all these different worksheets represented by these tabs, and they represent all the various stages or different modules by these this inner sort of circle with the arrows in the image in the middle. And so as we said before, here's the virtual energy analyzer. And if you want to explore some of the deep energy, retrofit archetypes, you can access them there. But for today, we're going to be using the My Portfolio. And you'll see here that in RetScreen, a portfolio is essentially a collection of individual facility files, or called .retx extensions, and the portfolio has a .retp, and you can continue to add or remove or modify or group or create subgroups in your portfolio as necessary. So I'm going to click on My Portfolio, and you'll see here that I have various connectors for that data automation. Remember, I spoke to you about that the data onboarding service and a bunch of examples, but I'm going to start with a blank project, and I'm going to do that by clicking on this this little briefcase icon here, blank project, and I have a blank portfolio. Notice that the tabs, the worksheets at the top are different now, and they're blank because I've started with a blank project. There's nothing in them, but these will be populated as we move forward. So if you've used the RetScreen portfolio analysis module in the past, you may have brought your files into it by clicking here on Import File, or you can also drag and drop them into the software, and you can remove them from your portfolio by right-clicking and clicking on Remove. But here are two new tools that we have in RetScreen now. So I have here this virtual energy analyzer tool. And so what this allows you to do is to use our archetypes that are in RetScreen in the virtual energy analyzer to build out your portfolio. And you can do this for power plants or district heating systems or all types of real property or even transportation models. But what I'm going to focus on is the net zero plan. And if I click this, I'm now actually in the net zero plan tool. And you'll see here that one of the major differences is that I can do my net zero plan. I can't do it for power plants or transportation. I'm really focused on real property for now. So what this tool does, it's only 2 screens. It asks for some basic information about the facilities that are going to be in your net zero plan, and then it asks you how do you want to achieve that. So let's do that now. And so let's go through this and build a net zero plan together over the next 30 minutes or so. So I'm going to create a net zero plan for 2050, and so I'm going to do just type in the name here so that you'll see it says group name, and we'll see that this name will show up later. And the next thing, so in this screen, you see that there are sections that have this border around them. And so the first section here is the default. So this allows you to set the defaults for your project and then copy them so that you're not always having to type and retype all the same information. So for example, the location. So I'm going to open our climate data location, and you can see that the default here is at our research center, CanMed Energy Research Center out in Varennes in Quebec. But let's create a fictitious situation here. Let's suppose that we are a commercial property developer, and we're based sort of southwest of Toronto in the Oakville region, and we own several properties out here. So I'm going to zoom in here. Yeah, so let's zoom in. You see, oh, this is a bunch of commercial industrial park here. So here are some two office towers. You can tell by the shadows, quite long. You can see what the roofs are like. There's lots of nice big flat roofs, lots of parking space, potential for. You can see someone was doing donuts here in the parking lot. But let's suppose that these are two of our facilities. So you can really zoom in and look what's actually on the roof. You can see here there's a facade on the roof. There's various equipment, and so this will help us determine how much photovoltaics we can put on the building itself. So I'm going to say this is my facility, and you'll see that RetScreen. So I'm in the climate database. RetScreen has automatically identified that the closest climate data location is the Pearson Airport at Toronto, which is 20 kilometers away. However, if I kind of zoom out, you can see that we're actually quite close to Lake Ontario, and I know for a fact that there is this next closest one, which is at Burlington Piers, actually is similarly quite close to the water. So I think that climate data will be more representative of what I'm going to experience here at this location. So I'm going to double click on Burlington Piers, and I'm going to click OK, and you'll see that this data has been updated. And now I want this to be the default. So look at, so this is, I'm not actually adding facilities to my net zero plan. This happens down here where it says archetypes. So you'll see that the archetype here says in Varennes, where our research center is located. So if I click this button here, copy to all, it's going to change this data. So I'm going to click it and copy to all, yes, and now I have my location. And I'm going to do the same thing for the facility type. So RetScreen has a bunch of different facility types, as I mentioned before. And so, for example, if I was doing this for a school board, I might want to have a default as various primary schools or secondary schools. But in our case, we are a commercial property developer, and those were office buildings. And yes, they were large office buildings. And I'm going to click copy to all. And now that's pasted. Okay, so now I'm ready to start building up my my portfolio of my deep retrofit archetypes. Okay, so those large buildings, let's call them, let's give them a name. They were office complex. Let's give that name. And there were 2 of them we saw. Okay, so we have 2. And you see here, remember I mentioned before about the disposed facilities. So if there was a plan to sell by 2050, we're doing a net zero plan 2050, so just over 25 years away. If within those 25 years, those buildings were slated for demolition, or we were going to sell them or something, I would put how many of these two would be disposed of. In this case, we don't want to do that. We want to look at our keep all our facilities, and then the next one, let's say, let's also add some medium office towers, and let's call these sort of office condos type thing, office suites, and maybe we have 3 of those. Again, we're not going to dispose of any of them. And then maybe we also have some apartment buildings. So that would not be under commercial institutional. That's going to be under residential. And yeah, apartment multi-unit housing, and it's a high rise. Sure. So let's call that apartment tower, which is right nearby. Let's add, maybe we also have some apartment suites. So let's do the same thing here, residential, mid-rise, and this would be apartment suites. And maybe there was 3 of those. And lastly, maybe we've started to diversify, and we have maybe some, you see when I clicked on plus, it automatically brings the office building large, which was my default. That's why you do that. So maybe I have a big box store, and I know that that's in standalone retail, and I'm going to call that a retail outlet. And you know what, just to add a little bit of, change things up a little bit, maybe that one wasn't in Oakville. Maybe that one was, maybe it was a little bit, here, maybe it was here in the Hamilton area. And I know that there's some large stores here. So here, this is, maybe it's this store here. I think that might be a Costco, actually. So, and lo and behold, it's actually in the same sort of climate data location, because it's close to the water as well. So I'm going to click OK. And so you see what we've done here is we've built up our portfolio of facilities, and I'm going to click next, and I'm going to go to the next page on the net zero planning tool. So these are the sort of the guts, if you will, of the net zero planning tool. And you'll see here, like everywhere in RETScreen, we always try to go left to right, top to bottom. And so you'll see that each of these sections has a border around them, and the names of those borders match exactly the framework that we had before. And if you want to reference that framework, you can click it up here, this circle that says framework. So the first thing that, let's just go through this now and start filling it in. So the first thing it asks is, what are your reference GHG emissions and what is your target? So if you have a reference, you would type it here, but I don't have any information about this commercial real estate developer. I don't know what their reference or what they're trying to do. But let's say that they're attempting to hit a 90% reduction, their 90% emissions reduction by 2050. That's fairly typical. Okay, so the next thing is asking for the baseline energy and GHG emissions. So you'll see here that so the first option is to use the default emissions analysis within the archetypes themselves, and that's one option. A couple of other options that we have is RETScreen has a GHG emissions database, including projected emissions factors. So we have those for every Canadian provinces, and it's you can import and develop your own for anywhere in the world. And so what this will do is the emissions of the electrical grid of the electricity change over time. And so this database will take that into account. And so it asks what our baseline year is. And our baseline year, maybe we want to do our 90% reduction based on our 2022, our 2022. The next thing that RETScreen asks is, and you can also put a user defined. So if you know specifically what your emissions factor is, you can put that in there as well. Next thing RETScreen asks for, what is your base case heating system? So do you want to use the heating system that is in our archetypes? So we've gone and we have done our best guess as to what the heating systems for each of those facilities, the office towers, the apartment buildings, and the retail stores that we put in before. But you may have special information and you know specifically that for your buildings or a group of buildings, you have specific way that that it gets heated, and you would type that in here. But for now, I'm going to use the archetypical facilities. I don't have any information that's different than that. Step 3, moving along, is RETScreen asks us to consider do we want to consider the cleaning of the electricity grid? And yes, we absolutely do want to do that. And here again, do we want to look at that electricity grid over time? Or do we want to assume that the grid, the electricity that we'll be purchasing is zero emissions? Or again, do we want to specify a specific emissions factor for that? So in our case, I want to use our projected database. And yes, 2050 matches when we want to align with our net zero plan. Step 4 is for our disposed facilities. Do I want to include them? Well, in this case, I don't. There's no point. I didn't have any disposed facilities. But if I did, I would click here, and it asks you to type the name for the group of facilities in the portfolio. So they'll be those facilities will sort of be split off and given their own label so that you can still look at the analysis for those buildings, but they won't be included in the proposed case for your net zero plan. So I'm going to disable that because I don't want to do that. Step 5 is for the energy efficiency measures. So here is really one of the big items of the net zero plan, and that is, remember when I said that we're looking at the individual or the facility level, individual facility level deep retrofit archetypes. And this is where this comes from. So when you're developing your net zero plan in RETScreen using this tool, the energy efficiency measures are going to be the ones that we have developed and put in the deep retrofit archetypes. And you can go look at those separately, but this, what it will do is for each of the facility types that I chose on the previous page, it's going to look up in our virtual energy analyzer in our database of archetypical facilities and pull out the deep retrofit archetype for that. So there's different types of archetypes in RETScreen, and so it will pick out the deep retrofit archetypes, which have a 80 to 90% emissions reduction target. Okay. Now the next step is the electrification of heating. So do I want to look at that? So in this case, I'll say yes, but this is really so up to now. Okay, we've defined what we want to do, and from level 6 onwards, we're constraining what we want to do. So for example, if I did not want to include electrification of heat, I want you to look at this where it says energy efficiency measures, where it says the 80 to 90% reduction in emissions. So if I click, I don't want to include electrification of heating. Look, this has changed to our other set of tools, our other set of archetypes in our archetype database, are energy-based ones, which are typically centered around sort of 30 to 40% reductions, or tend to be more sort of in the cost-effective range. But for now, let's keep this electrification of heating, and you'll see that when I do that, the next several options become available. And this is okay. You want to do the electrification of heating. What do you want to consider? So moving down the list here, we go from sort of typically less efficient to more efficient, but also less costly to more costly. So do you want an electric boiler or electric furnace? That's one option. Do you want to look at air source heat pumps, using electricity to run your air source heat pumps for heating? And the most expensive in this list here is a new ground source heat pump system. Do we want to include that? So these are great to, and I'll show you how later how it's really, really easy to do sort of a scenario analysis and a what if analysis. What if we include ground source heat pump, or what if we only have electric boilers and furnaces? And a lot of this will depend on the emissions of your grid, because as the grid gets cleaner, it's more and more justifiable to use systems which will which electrify or heat. So for example, you'll have a very different situation in, say, Alberta or Saskatchewan, where there's coal, oil, or even coal-fired electricity, compared to Manitoba or Quebec, which are essentially renewable, zero-emission electricity generation for the most part. I'm generalizing, but that's it. And then RETScreen asks you as well, what's your peak load heating system? So even when you install these systems, right, as I said before, you don't need to go crazy here, because a peak load heating system may only be used for a couple of hours a year, and so really won't contribute that much to the emissions. Whereas going to 100%, it may be very difficult to get everything at zero emission. So here, RETScreen asks, what is your peak load heating system, and what is the percentage of the energy supplied? So typically you do that through a load duration curve analysis, and RETScreen has tools in the performance analysis, in the analytics worksheet to do that. And RETScreen asks you also, so what is the electricity consumption ratio? So look, what's happening here is in step 5, we're going to use our energy efficiency measures to, as I said before, to reduce our electricity consumption and the peak load as much as possible. And then we're going to add back in an electricity load, electricity consumption and load through our electrification of heating. And so what is the ratio? Do you want to keep the same amount of electricity, or are you projecting to have more electrical consumption or less? And so RETScreen allows you to do that. And again, that's an advanced analysis that you can do typically using monitored data and low duration curves and so on. Let's leave it as is for now. And so yes, we do want to include electrification of heating. The next step, again, is saying, do you want to use on-site renewables at the location? And so by default, we include photovoltaic. Usually those are the ones that are typically used, but you can always go into the files later and add, for example, wind turbines, or if you're near a microhydro site or something. And so, yes, we do want to include photovoltaics. And now here, it still in sort of constraining is how much of the rooftop, depending on which heating source you have, how much of the rooftop area do you want to cover with photovoltaics? And once you've surpassed that, how much on the ground do you want to put? So for example, if you have sort of brownfield nearby, or as we talked before, sort of canopies on parking lots and so forth. And as we said, you generally can't put 100% of your roof on with photovoltaics, and so we'll leave these values here for now. But that's something that you can look at, and we can actually even go into the images, the satellite images that we saw before, and come up with a sort of a rough thumbnail sketch. But they generally tend to be around these values. Again, in general terms. So moving over to the right-hand side now on the offsite renewables. So RETScreen says and asks us here in step 8, do you want to include offsite renewables? So this is where an organization would be buying renewable electricity from a provider. So, for example, I think a huge percentage of the current sort of solar and large wind farms, large solar farms in the pipeline, at least in the United States, are, you know, a lot of the big tech companies, you know, Microsoft or Amazon, the big data centers for Google and Facebook and them. So a huge percentage of electricity now in that pipeline is being built and developed by those companies. And so there's an opportunity. Do you want to include and buy some of that renewables from offsite? In step 9, we're talking here about carbon offsets. So do you want to include carbon offsets? So, for example, we said that we're going to attempt through you know, our disposing facilities, through energy efficiency measures, electrification of heating, on-site renewables, off-site renewables. We're trying to get to 90%. What do you want to get to? What do you want the rest to be? So remember, I said that stubborn 10% often at the end is difficult to get. So if we want to get our total GHG emissions reduction to 100%, RETScreen then asked you what the carbon offset rate is. So for example, so these are voluntary carbon offsets that would be purchased. Typically, I was checking the other day on the internet, the rate was, you know, $7, $8, $9, $10 American, which is, you know, $12, $13 Canadian. So let's put $12 here for our carbon offsets. And the last item here, step 10, is more of a reminder. There's nothing really that we can do, is to progress tracking. So yes, do all these things and then start you know, tracking your energy consumption and start reporting on that to sort of close that loop, remembering that this is a cycle. Okay, so there's the 10 steps. The last items here are a little bit more on the display side. So how do you want RETScreen to treat certain aspects of the modeling as it goes through? So the financial parameters and the emissions. So RETScreen asks for, you know, inflation rates and the project life and how much debt the project will incur. You know, so we've been in a little bit of a higher inflationary rate period. And so one error I sometimes see people will put is they'll say, oh, you know, we had, you know, 6.8% inflation last year. It's like, yes, that was last year. This is over the next 20 years. And so, okay, it might not be 2%. We might be looking at a 3% inflation rate. But it's important, you know, what we're essentially doing here is economic forecasting. So it's difficult to do. But yeah, you don't necessarily want to put the thing that the value that you saw the most recently in the latest newspaper or something. And below that, RETScreen asks us for our carbon shadow price, or the price on pollution. So, for example, the Canadian government has this carbon tax, which is projected to be, you know, currently $170 per ton, and so we can put that there. And so this is where this puts a price on not reducing those emissions, right? One thing to remember here is if you are in Canada working either for the government or in the government, the Treasury Board has a life cycle costing analysis where they have certain specific parameters. So specifically, their project life, the analysis needs to be done over 40 years. And what these archetypes will do, what RETScreen will do, is over 40 years, certain pieces of your equipment will need to be changed. So, for example, with photovoltaics, often inverters need to be changed after you know, 24 years or so. And so those are called periodic costs in RETScreen, and RETScreen will include those in its analysis, and that can affect the economics of your project. I'm going to keep it now to the user defined, and the last item here is RETScreen asks us, what do we want to display after it's done its calculation, benchmark, feasibility analysis, waterfall, and custom. And I'll leave all those there, and we'll click on calculate. So I'm going to click on calculate. It says, do you want to continue? I'm going to be adding all these things to your analysis, to your portfolio analysis. I click yes, and RETScreen chugs along. It creates these files. And so what RETScreen is doing is for each of those facilities, it's looking up what the archetype is, it's creating the file, looking up what the climate data is, and actually it's done. Can't even finish my sentence. It will do a cost energy analysis. It'll do, including cycling through multiple iterations of the heating systems, the carbon offsets, the on-site renewables. It will do a Monte Carlo analysis, a financial analysis, and it's done. And so it has done 10 facilities here, and you can see all of our facilities. We have our apartment suites, our retail outlet, and it tells you what archetype it used, what deep retrofit archetype it loaded up, and all the information. So you can see they're all in Oakville except this one. So it actually is smart. It knows where everything is, and we can look at the image of the archetype, so we know kind of what we're looking at, what we've modeled. It tells you what the heating system was. Remember, we had some that were ground source heat pumps, some that were boiler. It tells you how much photovoltaics is on the roof, how much electricity that provides, how much of the roof space it takes up. Same for the ground mount. How much, how much offsite renewables were purchased, and as well how many offsite, how many carbon credits, how many carbon offsets were purchased. So everything is here, and I'll go to the dashboard just to show you that it hasn't done anything on the dashboard because this is for your own facilities. But if I go to the plan is where the analysis is done. So I'm going to close these sections here so we can focus on this plan. And so it has automatically, from all that modeling, developed all these charts and these tables below. So in this chart here, this is the benchmark chart, and where the facility size is on the bottom axis, on the horizontal axis, and the fuel consumption. And you can see the top dot here is what the base case was, and the proposed case is the empty dot below it. And we do the same thing for GHG emissions. We can look at our emissions consumption or fuel consumption and how they've changed. So this left bar is the base case, the original situation, and the green one is the proposed case. And if we go to the same graph but looking at emissions reductions, you can see we really have managed to reduce everything to 90%. And you can see that in the table below. So we have right here in this column here, you can see the GHG emissions, and you can see that in all cases, we've reduced our emissions by 90%. Now, how much does it cost to reduce those emissions? So very expensive. So you can see that for our apartment suites, it's almost $730 a ton. Our apartment tower is $500 a ton. Our office complex, almost $1,000 a ton to reduce. So we did it, but it didn't come cheap. And if we look at how much it actually cost, the initial cost to do those energy efficiency measures, we can see here that just those apartment suites are over $1 million. The apartment tower is over $4 million, and so forth. So yes, we did it, but it's not cheap. And from experience, I know that a lot of that cost is from the electrification of the heating system. Because they're so expensive, they, for the most part, have deeply negative net present values when you do the full life cycle cost analysis in the financial analysis. And if we look, let's skip now to this waterfall graph. This is, so we could see the baseline that we had for our facilities is here. And going through that framework, which we saw before, and remember, if I click this button here, you see all the elements in that framework. We can see here, so this is our baseline. We actually don't reduce very much from having a cleaner electricity grid. And that's because the grid in 2050, where we forecasted for our net zero plan, is almost as clean as it is today. I see that the bulk of my emissions reductions come from energy efficiency measures, 69% of them. My electrification of heating accounts for 15% of my emissions reduction. And then I have my renewables, both on-site and off-site. And then my carbon offsets make up for the last 10%. You can see 9.9% there. And let's look at the cost. It's a waterfall graph in the opposite direction. It's going up. So we could see that the energy efficiency measures, they were 69%, and it accounts for 46% of the overall cost. Here's the electrification of heating. It accounts for 36% of the cost, but it only managed to take 15% of the emissions reduction, and so forth. So let's do a quick analysis and see see what we can do. So I'm going to go back to the portfolio. I'm going to re-click on the net zero plan. Okay, I have 4 minutes left that I want to do this, and we can do it. So 4 minutes. Now I'm going to say, hey, let's see what we can do sort of in a shorter time frame. Let's do 2030, and let's call this towards net zero. And I still have all the same buildings. And what I'm going to do is say, hey, can I get 50% of my reductions by 2030? And so we keep our baseline. It's the same type of modeling. Our cleaner electricity grid, sure, but it's 2030. And in this case, you know what? I want to see, what if we just keep the existing heating systems? So let's just uncheck that. You'll see now that the feasibility study goes to 30 to 40%. And I'm going to keep everything else the same. So I'm going to, again, click on OK. RETScreen will not delete my old data. It's going to create a new net zero plan. And just like before, it's creating each of those facilities. We know how it works. I think that time was even faster. And I can see here I have my two plans, my net zero plan and towards net zero. And you can see the data in them is different. So for example, in this towards net zero heating system, there's nothing written because I'm keeping the system from the archetype, right? I'm not electrifying that heat. Now, if I go to the plan, I'm going to, let's quickly go to the GHG emissions. So you'll see here that in the table below, we have that 50% emissions reduction, and you'll see that the green bar is quite a bit higher. And so we've done it. RETScreen has figured out how to, has calculated those GHG emissions. And if we look at the cost this time, everything is negative, right? But remember before these were $700, $400 a ton. Now it's negative $800 a ton, negative $550 a ton. What that means is it's costing the organization money not to do the projects. And so that's really interesting. So you can see how quickly we can do sort of a scenario analysis in RETScreen using this net zero planning tool. If we look at the costs, now look at this apartment tower. It's just under $400,000 instead of $4 million, a 10-fold decrease in the cost. And all I really did was I decreased, I eliminated the electrification of heating and looked at sort of an interim plan. Again, the net present value now, these are all generally great projects, $1.5 million net present value. And if we look at the emissions, this is interesting. So our baseline, so why has this gone up? Well, we're not going to 2050 now, we're going to 2030. And in Ontario, there is a plan to retrofit a lot of the sort of nuclear plants. And so in the interim, they need to generate electricity somehow. And so the grid will get a little bit dirtier before it gets cleaner. You can see here that the energy efficiency measures take up, instead of almost 70%, they're 43%. And carbon offsets here now play a bigger role in achieving those goals. And again, if we look at the costs, electrification of heat isn't here because we didn't include it in the analysis. I'm going to stop here, and I think we'll go to our Q&A session. Let's see here. Yes, so the webinar will be recorded, and we'll be showing that a little later.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Kevin, for this very nice presentation. Really interesting. We've got actually a lot of questions here in the chat. So I've compiled some of them. One question that some people have been asking us in private. So some people, I think, were not able to see the Net Zero Plan tool in their version of RedScreen. So they were asking which version do they need to have access to the tool?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's version 9.1, which was released in November 2023. So if you go to our website, www.redscreen.net, and you download the software. But the Net Zero planning tool is available with the professional mode of RedScreen, and that requires a subscription. In fact, I think my next slide here has, when you have the professional mode of RedScreen, you get access to all of these features. So, the Net Zero Planning tool is here, as well as our deep retrofit emissions, and anything new that we're adding to the software is generally in the Net Zero, in this professional mode of the software, including a lot of new sort of data automation and what we call data connectors to bring data into the software.
Great, thanks. We have a question here. So someone is asking, can a Net Zero plan be developed from an existing portfolio in RedScreen, or does a Net Zero plan always have to get developed from scratch?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, okay, so in the portfolio view, if you click the Net Zero plan, you're creating something from scratch. Okay. However, if you have an existing portfolio, you can come here and click. If you go to this waterfall, you can create these graphs from your existing portfolio. So actually, if you have the RedScreen, if you go to this My Portfolio example in RedScreen and you click on it, do I want to say yes? I'm going to save the changes. So I'm going to call this the Net Zero Planning. Okay. Okay. So it's going to save that, and then it's going to load up. Okay. So this is a portfolio of buildings at Natural Resources Canada, and including several that are feasibility analysis. So you'll see here I have a bunch that are 30 to 40%. Here are a couple that are 80 to 90%. And just to show this, so these are deep retrofit. These are net zero. The analysis has already been done at the facility level, right? And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to briefly create a new group, and I'm going to call this Net Zero Plan. What Net Zero Plan from existing portfolio. Okay, and the parent group is this, and analysis type is, you know what, I'm just going to keep it like that, and it will, oops, did that wrong. There. Okay, so now I have this subgroup or sub-portfolio that includes those files. Now when I go to my plan, I can go and create, well, first of all, you'll see there's graphs here that are done, but I'm going to create a new waterfall graph. If I go to feasibility, now I can go and select my group. So this net zero, so you select your existing portfolio and you say what you want. Do you have a reference, and do you want the cleaner electricity grid, disposed facilities, and all those all those things that we mentioned before. And then when you click on OK, you generate your own net zero plan from your existing portfolio. And in fact, if you if you just want to use the waterfall tool, you can actually create your own waterfall graph, your own net zero plan. For example, if you have a report that was done, a corporate report, or other software that was used. So you can use this tool with your own data.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. We have a bunch of questions here that are very similar. So someone is asking, is there any tuning that can be done for the archetypes that can bring the project GHG emission closer to actual measured values?
Tuning, yeah. So that's a good question. So there's a couple of approaches, or there's a couple of things that you can and should do. So one is, I haven't showed this, but if you go to the file settings page, you can set in here your emissions database. You can put your what your fuels are for your heating systems. You can put your electricity rates and so forth. Okay, so those are the basic things that you would do to make sure that the output is representative of your situation. And the other thing you can do, actually, you know what? I'll double click on one of these. So if you double click on one of these, it will open that individual RET-X file, the individual facility analysis in a separate instance of RETScreen. So I'm going to have two RETScreens instances. So you see here it's saying it's in read-only mode because it's in a different folder. But I'm going to open this anyways. And so yeah. So actually, so I'm sorry, I got confused here. Let me go back to my file that recent files, net zero. No, okay. So I'm going to open this net zero plan. Okay, here we are. And let's open, for example, this office complex. Right, so I'm going to double click on that, and it's going to open in a separate instance of RETScreen. So here it is. Okay, so here's my facility. And so the first thing is, yeah, you're right. You do want to tune it because we used archetypes. And we may say, okay, well, look, the archetype says this is 12,000 square meters, but I know that it's different. So I just clicked on this scaling tool. This is also new in RETScreen. Not everyone may have seen this. So I can say, you know what, my actual facility size is 20,000 square meters. And I know that my heating system is, quite inefficient because the boiler is actually in the building beside it, and so I actually consume 15% more electricity than if I had it on site. But I'm going to do both buildings at the same time, and I can achieve sort of cost savings. So you can scale it up and tweak it. And when I click on the copy to user-defined model, what that will do is it will put it in a different model in RETScreen. So you'll see here, before I was in commercial institutional, now this says user-defined. Let me make this bigger. This says user-defined. And if I go to the energy model, this is the user-defined model where I have my net zero plan, and I have my energy efficiency measures. I have my on-site renewables. So it's taken all of those systems based on that scaling I still haven't lost the rest of my model. So I can go back here on the facility worksheet and under the facility type, click on commercial institutional, and it will still bring back my energy model. So you see I have lights and heating and so forth. And that would then be the next step, is to, your next step would be to then go into the model and start calibrating it with your measured data. Do an energy audit and start start making this model your own. There's no substitute for actually bringing in your own data, but you don't need to do that. You don't need to spend 6 months calculating and measuring things to get a plan, an idea of what you need to do.
Great. And actually a related question, Kevin, like people are asking if they can customize the energy efficiency measures that are applied to each building. Because when you showed the step 5 on that tool, you saw that you shown that we could only select the archetype. But can you just like tell us a bit more about how you would go to customize the energy efficiency for each of the facilities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the idea here is, and the idea with the RETScreen has always been, get the study done. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? As I like to say. And so yes, so use the archetypes and then go and change them. So for example, we're now in this office complex, and let's say, hey, you know what? Back in 2022, which was my baseline, and we had an energy audit done at the same time, I actually upgraded my HVAC system. So there's no improvements to be made. My HVAC system, my HVAC system ventilation here, and those have already been done. And you know what? The roof was never designed to have photovoltaics. And the engineers would not sign off on it. I can't put that on the roof. And you know what? The parking lot is actually leased, and the owner has no interest in putting, no interest in putting renewables there. And the offsite renewable market is tied up. We can't buy anything. So yeah, so I've tweaked it. So yeah, you can change and adjust those archetypes to match your facility. So here I've done those things. And the great thing is when I save this and then I go back into the model, you'll see here a pencil icon showing that it's being edited. I'm going to refresh this so it has the latest updated data. So now this facility, it will take those into consideration. So it won't have offsite renewables, and the energy efficiency measures will not, for that facility, include that. So yes, so first step, get everything done quickly. Second step, go and start refining. Third step, start measuring. Like, yes, it's that. And this is exactly why this framework is designed like this, is sure, get your baseline. Talk about your cleaner electricity grid, do those energy efficiency measures, and then continue the cycle.
Great. We have a question here. So somebody's asking if you can clarify if the net zero plan does only apply to Canada, or can it also be used for any location around the world?
Yeah, no, it can be used around the world. Yes, absolutely. It will be important if you're doing it in other locations, as I showed before on the file page and the settings, to make sure that you have your correct, your currency units, your cost information, your emissions database. Yeah, but there's nothing preventing you from doing that. In fact, right at the step 1, when we built our net zero plan and we selected our facilities, remember the first thing I did was I selected the location, and we went from our CanMet Energy Research Center just outside Varennes, and we went to Oakville just outside Toronto. I could have picked anywhere in the world there. So yes, you can have this work for any facility around the world.
Okay. Another question. So is this tool only for buildings, or can it be used for industrial sites? So when most of the emissions are from process energy and not from buildings.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, you can do it for industrial sites. So you'll see here I've selected. So right now, remember I showed at the beginning the deep energy retrofit for auto plant facilities, right? So that's here, and we're in the process of adding a bunch more. So all of our archetypes, we're continuing to add and make them available at the deep retrofit analysis level. So yes, you can. Stay tuned is what I would say.
Great. So when you were showing the Net Zero Plan tool, so you talked about that GHG database that people can enter and modify. Can you just quickly show how and where to find that database and how to change it?
Okay, there's a couple of places where you can do that. So if you go to File, Settings, okay, and you scroll down, these are some basic settings like your language and your currency and your units and so forth. But right in this section, I can't zoom this screen. Right in this section, you'll see under the emissions section, you'll see this database button. And if I click on this database button, you'll see that I can select from different regions in Canada, right? I can also add new database. So I can say what country I'm in and what emission sort of regime I have, whether I have electricity and gas and what my different fuels are and the emissions rate, what the reference emissions rate. You can export these databases. So I could export this database, change it. It's an XML file. You can open up in Notepad or anywhere, re-import it. I can duplicate. So there's a ton of tools here to allow you to customize and personalize your emissions database. And not only will that be used in the net zero plan, it'll be used also if you do RETScreen's performance analysis, so measuring and tracking your fuel consumption and emissions. And then if you're rolling that up, or when you're rolling that up into a portfolio, you can actually change that. So you can start with the RETScreen analysis while someone else, or you don't have all the data for your emissions database yet, and come back and update that. So I have my portfolio selected here. If I click on this button, and not everyone might know what this button does, Edit Portfolio. This is one of my favorite tools. It allows you to do a lot within, in bulk. So you'll see here under Data, there's GHG emissions factors. I can click on this and I can update from that file that I exported, for example. And we actually use this regularly in our data onboarding work for a lot of for the Treasury Board Secretariat, as I mentioned before. So yes, the answer is yes, you can do it. The way you access it would be through File, Settings, and then it's used in multiple places in multiple ways.
And maybe, Kevin, can you also show where, if you want to customize the electricity and fuel rates, where to do this?
Yeah, I actually thought about showing that. It's at the exact same place. So just below here, we have electricity and fuels. And so here I have my default. But if I click on this electricity and fuels rate database, we have for many, many, many different countries and, all the states and Canadian provinces. So for example, if you were doing this in Belgium, we have the electricity rates, both the residential, commercial, industrial rates, as well as the gas rates for multiple countries. And the same approach works here. You can add your own database. You can duplicate and import, export, and update them as you go.
Great. A question here, not directly related to the tool, but someone is asking if he wants to get training related to the software and to the tool. What are the different resources that are available?
Yeah, well, we're constantly adding new training resources to RetScreen. So one of the big ones is on every page or every worksheet in RetScreen, we have on the right-hand side in the menu, in the ribbon here, we have various items here. So we have our manual, thousands and thousands of pages and graphs and charts and tables. We have our e-learning videos, and this is context sensitive. So for example, if you're in the lights model and you click here, you'll see lights and so on. And then a bunch of sort of helpful reminders of workflows, formats, frameworks, charts and stuff. But if you don't want to remember all that, you can, again, go to File, Help. And under File, Help, you have this section here, and each of these are active buttons, which you can click. So you can go to our e-learning YouTube channel. So this video will be there in a couple of days. We also publish some of the algorithms and methodologies in our textbook, reference all of our case studies. We have a bunch of training materials and so on. And if you want to contact us, this second to last option here says RetScreen Customer Support. If you click on this, it will open your email client with our email or support email address automatically in there, and you can ask us any question, and it'd be a pleasure to help.
Yeah, just like browsing the questions here, like many have been already answered. So someone is asking here, so can we have any input on building envelope as well, or all the suggestions are on mechanical systems upgrades only?
Yeah, no, building envelope is a huge part of it. So here's the building envelope model, and yeah, you can define for each orientation and what your temperature is and when the building is on and when the building is off, and RetScreen will calculate both the losses and the solar gains, the natural infiltration, the air change rate, and whether the space is heated or cooled. And you can even get down to the detail of defining the layers of your wall and how thick they are and what their thermal conductivity is. And we have a program where we're even updating and this and keeping it up to date. So yes, the building envelope's a huge part of the RetScreen model.
Another question here for the financial analysis that you've done for the tool. So you've shown the graph where you were showing the dollar per ton. Someone is asking, is this dollar per ton of GHG for one single year, 2050, or is it cumulative?
No, it's not cumulative in the sense that it's not all the tons added together for all the years, but yes, it is for the whole duration. So it's that dollar per ton for the whole duration of the project. Yeah, I think that's how I understand that question. If I don't, send us an email and we'll clarify and we'll work that out. But yes, it's not cumulative, but it's not for just 1 year. It's for 1 year throughout the project duration.
It's an average for annual average.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Here's another question here for electrification. So when modeling the electrification of heating, do you consider the increase in peak demand and the associated costs for commercial facilities?
Yeah, so yeah, that's super important. So that's up to you to do, and don't forget to do that, because if not, you're emitting something huge. So yes, so when I was in this electrification of heating system, okay, there's 3 things you need to consider. One is, what systems do you want to activate, right? So if you're in a province or an area where you're paying 8 cents, residential 8 cents per kilowatt hour, it's very different than if you're paying 23 cents plus a demand charge, right? You need to think of that. And that will make a huge difference. You're probably not going to put the furnace boiler if you're an electric boiler if you're paying, very, very high electricity rates. Whereas previously I lived in a building that had a ground source heat pump for a condo, but 150 units, and it was peanuts to our electricity bill because we were at a residential rate on a ground source heat pump. It was great. So yes, you need to think of that as the person doing the net zero plan is this is precisely why we ask you these additional questions is, hey, do you want to take into account a peak load system? So you could say, no, I don't want a peak load system. I want it all provided by electric boiler, right? You could do that. But then you have to, exactly like whoever this person is, exactly like they say, yes, you have to consider of the additional costs by having a huge peak. But the other consideration is what your electricity consumption ratio is. So if you're reducing through step 5, your energy efficiency measures, you're reducing your electricity consumption as much as possible. You're hopefully also reducing your demand, your load, right? And so this gives you a chance to say, hey, are you okay if we go back up to the electricity consumption total that you had before? So these are very important questions, and you need to take them into consideration.
Excellent. Someone is asking here, can we use this tool for data centers? So to do a net zero plan for a data center.
We are in the process of adding data centers to RETScreen. So yes, that is happening, and the answer will soon be yes.
Perfect. Someone has a question for the benchmark graphs that you showed in the plan. So they're asking, what does the red versus the green color mean here?
Yeah, so that's a great question because I had the same question when it first came. So notice that the red is always when it's above the base case is above your benchmark. So you have this diagonal line, and a diagonal line on a graph like this, right, is, if you remember, it's from your high school math, is rise over run, or the vertical axis over the x-axis. So here we're looking at kilowatt hour per square meter. That's why that's a benchmark, right? So it's a kilowatt hour per square meter. And guess what? In the table below, look at the units, kilowatt hour per square meter. So if the energy use intensity, or the KPI, some people call it energy KPI, is higher than your benchmark, it's going to flag it as red. It's more of a visual representation to say, hey, these ones are kind of not within the range that you said you wanted.
Good. I see that we only have 2 minutes left, Kevin. So maybe 1 or 2 last questions here. So if your portfolio is spread across 2 or 3 provinces, is there a way to set different climate data locations?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things that I did at the beginning. So look, this one, let's do one now. This one's in Hamilton. Instead of Hamilton, let's put it up by Winnipeg. That building's in Winnipeg now, right? This residential unit is in Nova Scotia, in Halifax. I have a Halifax, right? Now when I click OK, let's leave everything the same just for fun. Leave OK. Oh, the name's going to be the same. But yeah, this will be now a multi-province, including multi-emission rates, right? So it's this last one here. And so you can see I have ones in Halifax, and I have ones in Winnipeg. And if I open the map, so when you have a portfolio or a group on page and you select map, it will actually show you where the facilities are. So I can see Oh, this is where my, let's see what it is. My large retail outlet is in Winnipeg. So yes, you can do that.
Excellent. Maybe just one last question. I see that question coming up a lot here in the chat. So people are asking, where do the costs come from for the measures? So how is RedScreen pricing the measures that are used in the archetypes?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll answer it quickly since we don't have a huge amount of time. So RedScreen has a cost database. So for example, here I'm in lights. I'm in the individual facility, and you see that I have this cost database beside it. So this cost database, so for lights, it's not only the cost of the lamp, it's the installation and how long the lamp's going to change, right? If the lamp only lasts 1,000 hours and it costs a certain amount, it's not necessarily a good thing. So there's these cost databases throughout RetScreen for pumps and motors and walls and solar heating systems and wind turbines and PV modules and so on. And we have this database. We update it regularly as prices, when they change enough to sort of warrant that. You can also and should be updating or adjusting these for your specific region. So for example, right down here is this option box drop-down list. So you can use the RetScreen values. You can use the settings that are in current. That was on the settings page. Remember I showed you where the database was? Well, just above that is where the cost database settings are. Or I can user define. So maybe you live in an area where it's quite remote and it costs a lot for transportation and prices are 50% higher. And, we've gone through an inflationary period. And, oh, we're not in Canada. We're in, we're in the United States and everything is a different price. So this database is completely customizable to your information, and this information will get picked up with that net zero plan when you do that through the file settings. So yes.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Kevin. I think we're going to end things here. So I see there are still a lot of questions in the chat that we were not able to answer. So if people still want to ask us the questions, they can still send the emails and your questions to our customer support email address. So I've added that in the chat in there. So thanks a lot again, Kevin, and thank you to everyone who attended this webinar today.
Thanks, everyone.